Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us this afternoon. We here at Private Vista are pleased to bring you our latest webinar titled Financial Planning Decisions and Student Loans, What You Need to Know. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Mr. Mike Wang.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on financial planning and student loans. My name is Mike Wang, and my colleague Dan Rooker and I are both financial advisors of Private Vista LLC, a local independent financial planning firm providing holistic planning services for individuals. We hope today to provide you with some basic information regarding financial planning and student loans, which will be helpful and relevant to each one of you. Our firm works with successful people who typically have 6 to 7 figure incomes and or significant net worths. This may not be you right today, but we want to get you started down that path. I first met Stephanie Snow through the Christian Legal Society, or CLS for short, a couple of years ago. Stephanie is the president of the DePaul CLS chapter, and I serve on the local attorney board here in Chicago. Through our Chicago attorney chapter, we seek to connect with the local CLS law student chapters to help encourage, equip, and support law students to integrate their faith with their eventual practice, and also for law students to meet like-minded attorneys. Stephanie asked me to put together this presentation, which Dan and I were happy to prepare. Sorry, I lost my slides here for a second. So together with Stephanie's friend Kizuwanda Wyatt, the president of the BLSA, both CLS and BLSA are both co-sponsoring this webinar. So let's move on to financial planning and student debt. And apologize here, technical difficulties. So I'm guessing you have some questions about finances, such as, how much of my salary should I save for retirement first or pay down my student loans? Should I rent or buy a place? And do I need an emergency fund? And just FYI, there is a questions tab where you as a participant can submit your questions online to us at the end, and we'll have a little bit of a Q&A. Let's get started with wealth building habits of highly effective people. So here are 5 key wealth building habits. And the first one here is spend less than you earn. Do this for a long time. You don't need a large income. There are many stories of everyday folks and non-lawyers who have diligently saved over many years and become millionaires and more. This will be you too if you can learn this habit. And this will lead to building savings. Save, save, save. 20% of your income is the goal, starting with your first paycheck. Pay yourself first. How? By direct depositing that 20% from your first paycheck into a separate savings account. When that builds up to cover at least 3 months of your living expenses, you have accomplished your first major goal, an emergency reserve fund. Congratulations. Then take the future 20% savings amounts and start investing that. Consider using a retirement plan. Make this a game for yourself and see if you can go higher than 20% over time. Third, avoid debt, especially bad debt. Avoid it like the plague. Never borrow to buy consumable items that depreciate right away. Things like TVs, cars, vacations, and fancy restaurant meals. Good debt, on the other hand, includes things like a good education and perhaps buying a home, though in moderation. Another tip, learn to ignore advertisements. Companies spend millions of dollars every year to convince us we need their products. Fourthly, set long-term goals. The longer term you can think, the better. Go ahead and include your short-term and medium-term goals, but think big picture and write them out. Then prioritize the most important ones to you. And fifth, give generously. The evidence is strong that giving has many positive benefits. Numerous academic studies have shown that giving makes us feel happier, improves our health, reduces stress, and even more. Plus, you can get a little help from Uncle Sam in the form of a tax deduction, and the recipients will be grateful as well. Once you master these habits and start practicing them year in and year out, this may lead you to become a wealthy individual. How would you define a wealthy individual today? Perhaps someone who is financially independent and can enjoy a comfortable lifestyle. Perhaps someone with no debt and the freedom to do whatever they wish. Or maybe someone who is simply content with what they have. It used to be that a millionaire was considered someone who was wealthy. Today, it still might be the same, or having several million, or possibly less. There was a popular book written, The Millionaire Next Door, a few years back. You might be interested to know some interesting stats about these folks from the book. As you can see, they tend to have good incomes, but not necessarily the highest. They worked hard, and most became first generation wealthy, so that means most of them did not inherit. And a large percentage of them, like you, went to college and got advanced degrees. So the good news is this: you don't have to be a tech guru or a startup genius. Now, here's some of their identifying characteristics, some of which may now start to look familiar. They are frugal, and they are amazing savers, always paying themselves first. There's that 20% figure again. They build up their emergency cash reserves, which is really helpful during a time in a crisis like today. They're big believers in education, and they are super careful about debt. So here's an easy way to remember how to save. Some of you may have heard of the 50-30-20 rule with regard to your income. So we would propose that you start with the 20% first, that green slice of the pie, by saving and paying yourself first. Then focus on your needs, the 50% needs, things like taxes, food, shelter, giving. And lastly, the 30% towards wants or wishes. You can adjust the slices of the pie to make them larger or smaller, but that will impact the rest of the pie. So next, let's talk about short-term goal planning. And today, we're going to focus on one short-term goal and potentially a big budget item. That's housing. Housing. Should I rent or should I buy? A cautionary note: many novice mistakes are made early on by committing too high a percentage of your income to housing. Most of you may be familiar with renting. For simplicity, let's assume you rent an apartment for $2,000 a month. That's $24,000 a year. And in general, a good rule of thumb is to keep your total housing expenses to less than about 1/3 of your gross income, including utilities, insurance, and taxes. So if you're making $75,000 a year, this could likely be at the upper end of your budget. And if you want to cut costs in housing, some options may include sharing your apartment, renting a room, living further away, or even living at home for a little while. So why would you want to consider cutting costs? Do you also have student loans, credit card debt? These are very important considerations too. In general, your total combined debt, student loans, credit cards, mortgage, should not exceed 36% of your income. This 36% total debt figure is different from the 1/3 allocation towards housing, which I just mentioned, though it is possible that some mortgage debt may overlap. Now, it's likely that many of you will want to own a home at some point. So remember that ownership involves many other costs and considerations. There are one-time costs like furniture, clothing costs, and a down payment. Typically, a 20% down payment. So if you're looking at a $200,000 home, you're going to need to save up $40,000 first. Plus, there's ongoing expenses like a mortgage, property tax, and maintenance. Furnaces, air conditioning units, and roofs will require occasional replacements, and they don't come cheap. So altogether, these ongoing costs need to add up to no more than 1/3 of your gross income. And if your student debt payments are significant, you may need to adjust this 1/3 downwards or possibly wait to buy. Now, because your total debt can impact what you can or should afford for housing, it's really important that you sit down and look over everything together, figuring out what you can truly afford after paying yourself first and then Uncle Sam, etc. It's much easier to trade up housing down the road once you can comfortably afford more, rather than committing a large portion of your income today to a housing budget that will lead to great and regular stress. So let's talk a little bit about bad debt versus good debt. First, good debt. This can be buying a house or student loans, for example. Generally speaking, that's good debt in our books. But why within reason? Because it's too easy to get in over your head by spending too much. And that causes higher payments and more stress. And I think we can all agree that we don't need more stress in our lives. Then there's bad debt. We've talked about this a little bit. So consumer debt, think credit cards, borrowing to buy things that don't appreciate in value after you purchase them, like that perfect $15,000 furniture set at Ethan Allen, or the top of the line appliances for your first place. Sure, they might offer attractive incentives like 0% interest rate for some period of time, but don't fall for this trap. If you cannot afford to pay cash for it right now, you're probably not in a position to make that purchase responsibly. And here's another secret. Credit card companies will gladly have you paying them 20% interest for life. And did you know that many studies show that consumers spend anywhere from 33% to 200% more on average just by using a credit card versus paying cash? That means even those who faithfully pay off their credit cards each month will spend more just by using credit cards. Just imagine what Amazon Go stores will do to increase their profits at the expense of our pockets. Now, for good debt, you can see how student loans can be a barrier towards saving up to buy a home. Let me introduce you to my colleague Dan Rooker, who is a graduate from Kenyon College, where he also swam competitively. He also has a CFP designation and he loves to help people. Dan is passionate about managing student debt and he knows quite a bit about this specialized area of financial planning, which is constantly changing. Here's Dan to talk about managing debt.
Thanks, Mike, for the introduction. Hope everyone is doing all right in this coronavirus environment. Everyone is staying safe, self-quarantining, and doing okay with distance learning. It's, those of you watching, I can't imagine what that's like going into graduation, so all the best to you. I want to make sure we're very clear about this next part of the webinar, where we're going to go into student loans. The example we've prepared today is just that. It's an example. Your loan situation it's going to be different. It's probably more complex than what we'll introduce today. We're not going to be able to give you the answer for your situation, but we'll give you some directional advice so that you know where to start. I get to talk today about a topic that's not very well understood by a lot of people, even in our industry, in financial planning, and that's student loan debt. Before we get into it, with this new working from home environment, I've just wanted to share a few disclaimers, developed a couple pet peeves myself. If you hear background noise or you can't hear me clearly, type that in your chat box to let the organizer know, and he'll pop in and say, hey, Dan, you need to fix something because there's something wrong going on your end. If you hear my dog snoring in the background, because he finds this just about as interesting as most of us do, type in the chat box, let me know, and I'll get him to move. And if you have just general questions along the way, we're going to answer them at the end as best as we can. If we can't answer them during the Q&A session at the end, we'll follow up with you afterwards. Okay? So let's get into it. I'm going to start with a good old quote. Using money you haven't earned to buy things you don't need to impress people you don't like. That's Americanism. What's a quote without, if it's not old, by someone famous or by someone old? There's a lot of ways to interpret this quote. I say that as long as you get the big things right, that's paying yourself first, like Mike mentioned before, you get that right, it doesn't really matter what you spend the rest of your money on. So pay yourself first and have your avocado toast. Go for it. Couple stats for us, just to whet the appetite. 1.64 trillion in student loans as of last count. There's 45 million borrowers out there, and basically the concentration of loan balances, the highest loan balances, sit with grad students. It sits with those of you watching and a lot of grad students around the country. And the point of this slide is you're not alone. This is big, it's crushing, and it's not going away. And because of that, it's absolutely that much more important to get this part of your financial planning decisions in life right. Let's take a look at how that looks for a law student. Let's imagine for a second here an attorney. Let's name him Jeremy, who graduated in 2019. He's not married. He's filing taxes as a single individual, and he's got a lot of loans. Just a little color, a little insight on that loan number. I got to that by taking Chicago area L1 student tuition and then adding in room and board, multiplying that by 3 years, and accounting for interest that grows on the balance of the loans distributed to Jeremy while in law school. I think it's helpful to just provide some perspective, kind of like, if you've never paid an accountant before to do your taxes, whatever the bill is, any number greater than $1 might seem expensive until you get some perspective to understand, okay, this accountant charges me a lot and this account over here doesn't charge me that much at all. It's the same thing for student loans. I think it's helpful to understand from the perspective of someone in the industry like myself, who's seen a lot of situations and has read about this and is staying up to date with the industry. There's what I'll call usual steps for student loan borrowers. You can call it that. You can call it letting your loans happen to you. This is the path that a lot of borrowers follow. And we'll just use Jeremy as our guinea pig here. So Jeremy, like I said before, he graduated in 2019. Right before graduating, he probably went through what's called loan exit counseling. It's different at every school. Some go way into it, some don't. From what I've seen, it's usually 10 minutes where they hand you a piece of paper after you walk into a room and you get served. You get served a piece of paper that details how much you owe and asks you to sign the dotted line to acknowledge the amount and time, the servitude, the time you will start to pay back to the debt king, and it says that you're going to start paying back your loans in 6 months. That 6-month period is called a grace period. So Jeremy doesn't have to make payments during the 6 months immediately following graduation. And for a lot of people, a lot of borrowers, that's a gift. It's a gift because, they're starting their first job. They're focused on passing the bar. They're trying to build an emergency fund, whatever it may be. The 6-month time period seems like a gift. And we'll talk about why it may not be later on. Fast forward a couple months, Jeremy hasn't thought about his loans since loan exit counseling. Graduation went great. He took the bar. He's hoping to hear back. His loan servicer, which is assigned to him for his loans, reaches out to him, sends in an email that says, just so you know, reminder, this is how much you owe. Loan payments are starting in December. Hope you're ready. December comes along, and Jeremy's stuck on what's called the default plan. The default plan is the 10-year standard repayment plan. And the 10-year standard repayment plan says, hey, if you pay this fixed amount, so for Jeremy in this case, he has a $294,000 loan balance. If he pays $3,300 a month for 10 years, every month on time, the loan balance will be paid off at the end. He'll have paid back his principal of $294,000, and along the way, in total, he'll have paid $105,000 in interest. Now that seems like that's maybe okay. I'll represent that in today's dollars. So accounting for inflation, that feels like in today's dollars, $351,000. So $400,000 over 10 years feels like $351,000 today. And that might be all right. That might be okay if Jeremy goes into big law. But let's just play this out and add a little bit of more to the fact set. Boom. Jeremy did not get that job at Kirkland Ellis, unfortunately. But he's pursuing his passion and he's working for the state. If you work for the state in Illinois, you're probably making somewhere between $60,000 to $70,000 as at the beginning. You probably have access to a retirement plan, the thrift savings plan, or we mostly know it as the 401k. You may have heard of it. And there's a match, so Jeremy is just putting in enough money from his income to get the match. He's putting money into a health savings account as well. And on his net take home from that, he's netting every month about $4,000. And if you think about that, if he takes home $4,000 and his 10-year standard repayment plan, because he let his loans happen to him, has a $3,300 required payment, that's a non-starter. I don't know anybody who, that's just not going to work, right? So Jeremy has to look at other options. And what we have here on the screen for those of you watching is kind of the broad, big picture view of what Jeremy's options might be. In red, we have boxed the default plan. That's the 10-year standard repayment plan. And Jeremy might be looking at refinancing. Maybe he can refinance, get a lower interest rate, stretch his 10-year standard repayment plan to 20 years, and take some pressure off of making a required payment of $3,300 a month. That might work. What I would say to that is just be really careful. Be super sure that refinancing makes the most sense for you, that it's in your best interest. Because once you decide to do that, if you take your federal loans that you borrowed going to law school and you refinance and you're enticed by that online ad at SoFi, or this is not like a paid program, so I don't get in trouble for bashing them, but or for representing them or mentioning them, but they might advertise a lower interest rate. Like your federal loans are at 6.5% or 7% interest, and SoFi or Laurel Road or Credible or Earnest, any one of the online lenders are saying, we can give you an interest rate for 3%. And that sounds great, except that you have to take into account, if you're going to do that, you're planning to pay your loans down to zero. There's no forgiveness happening. There's no reduction in payments if you are unemployed for a bit or you're trying to figure life out and you want to change careers. There's, like, when you refinance, you can't go back. So make sure that it's in your best interest. For Jeremy, let's just assume that he's going to make $70,000 for the time being. That's his income. He's single, not married. When he's looking at this, he should take a look at the income-driven repayment plans listed above the red box. And for Jeremy, as a new borrower, the old ones, not boxed here, extended repayment, graduated repayment, income contingent, income-based, those don't apply to Jeremy. We're just going to go over the pay-as-you-earn plan and the revised pay-as-you-earn plan. Where are we? Okay, yes. And so it's helpful to, I think, explain how income-driven repayment plans work. In this case, we're going to talk about the pay-as-you-earn plan and the revised pay-as-you-earn. They both work the same way. There's three components. First, there's a time component, 20 years or 25 years, depending on which of those two you're on. And second, at the end of that time period, at the end of 20 years or 25 years, if there's a balance left over from the payments that Jeremy's been making, the balance is forgiven. It's forgiven, yes, but the forgiven amount isn't free. The forgiven amount is taxed and it's added to the borrower's income tax that year. So let's say Jeremy, in this case, he makes $70,000 in year 20, and the balance at the end of that is $300,000. So his income to Uncle Sam, the IRS, that year in year 20 is $370,000. So beyond paying his normal taxes for making $70,000 a year, he's probably going to have a tax bill of around $100,000. Now think about that. That might sound terrible at first, but Uncle Sam is saying, "Hey, Jeremy, you owe me $300,000, but pay me $100,000. We'll call it even. All right." Now, Jeremy, if he's thinking about it in that sort of mindset, that perspective is like, yeah, that works for me. Let's leave it to the generation below us. It'll be their problem and our secret. All right. And number three, all income-driven plans are based on income. The more you make, there's a formula for it. We'll show it here in a couple slides. But the more you make, the more you pay. And the less you make, the less you pay. For Jeremy, we're going to take this example through with the pay-as-you-earn plan. So we're going to consider the 20-year plan. If you want to talk through the nuances of the differences between those two, that's a much longer conversation. But The formula for both plans comes out with the same payment. There's just some things that are different when you're married, for example. So we're going to use the pay-as-you-earn plan. It uses a formula. It's complicated. We'll just leave it at, based on his income, his monthly payment is $390 a month. Now remember, there's a tax bill. So let's see how this plays out in tabular form. So up here on the screen, I just want to point out a couple numbers that'll be helpful. So for the year 2020, Jeremy's monthly payment is $390 a month. And what's interesting about that is because of his loan balance, the interest on that loan balance, the 6.42% interest rate, is greater than his monthly payment. So he doesn't actually pay down any principal. In fact, the balance on his loan grows, and it continues to grow. So over the course of 20 years, which is not shown on the screen here, his balance is going to grow to about 580,000 about, and there's going to be a tax bill. So Jeremy needs to, if you think about it, like you're making 70,000, you're not going to be able to pay a tax bill if you don't save for it along the way. So if Jeremy pays himself first every month, first he makes his loan payment, and then he saves $1,000 into a savings account, say a high yield savings account. He saves $1,000 a month. That is going to enable him to pay that eventual tax bill in year 20. Okay? So what that looks like for Jeremy in comparison to paying a 10-year standard repayment plan on his loan balance is he pays back $89,000 over 20 years. That's his $390 per month, paid every year, grown by inflation because his income is growing by inflation, discounted back to today's dollars. So how does it feel in today's dollars? It's $89,000. And then the 201 is the amount that he'll need to have saved in today's dollars for the tax bill. All in, $291,000 is what we're looking at for this plan. So it's a good deal. He's saving about $60,000 by getting on an income-driven repayment plan that helps account for the fact that he's not making big law salary, right, and bonus. He's doing something that's affordable, that's enabling him to save on top of that. If somehow he was able to live on pays $390, pays $1,000, and then there's some wiggle room within his $4,000 take home after you take out those first two payments to also save, then great, he's able to save. This third bar graph we have on the screen here is, I think, really, really interesting because Jeremy works for the state. That's really key. He works for a qualified employer. A qualified employer in the case for student loans means the government or a nonprofit. Think a 501c3 organization. There's this acronym on the screen here that's jargon to most people. Maybe you've heard of it, just so we're all on the same page. I'll just review. PAYE, it stands for Pay As You Earn, and PSLF stands for Public Service Loan Forgiveness. Public Service Loan Forgiveness is not a different income-driven repayment plan. It's simply an addition or an accessory, if you will, to any of the income-driven repayment plans out there. We're going over the Pay-As-You-Earn income-driven repayment plan. There's also the revised Pay-As-You-Earn and the others we listed on screen earlier in the presentation. So on the Pay-As-You-Earn plan, Jeremy stays on it. He's planning to stay on it for 20 years in that second bar example. On the third part, he's on it, and at year 10, the balance at that point in time gets forgiven. And not only does it get forgiven, and he's done with his loans, but he gets forgiven tax-free, which is really key. Because he works for a qualified employer, as long as he tracks his payments through his loan servicer, he can apply for public service loan forgiveness in year 10 on the 20-year Pay-As-You-Earn plan, okay? And the cool thing about that is that $114,000 on screen, that doesn't go towards a tax bill. That's just savings in a savings account. So all in, he's paid $50,000 for 10 years, and his $294,000 plus interest student loan balance is forgiven. It's done. Now there's one more thing. Let's just add one more thing to the mix. Something that we think is helpful to know. The income-driven repayment plans, all the formulas, key off of your adjusted gross income. And your adjusted gross income is not your gross income. It's not $70,000. It's your adjusted gross income. So if you contribute to, in this example, a retirement plan at work, Jeremy in this case is putting $3,500 a year away. If somehow he finds a way to save more, or he changes where he's saving that $114,000 every paycheck because it doesn't have to go towards a tax bill, and he saves that $1,000 a month into his retirement plan at work, that actually lowers his taxes that he'll pay every year for 10 years. It'll also lower his loan payments every year for 10 years. So instead of paying $50,000, he'll pay $37,000. And I think that's really helpful to know is that, if you can change where you're saving your savings, you can control your loan payments, and it's a win-win for you, the borrower. It's a win-win for Jeremy. Okay, so that pretty much sums up our example for today. It's really, we've gone over a very simple, straightforward example of a single individual. In our experience, it's more complicated than that. So please take the time to understand your situation around your loans. What kind of loans do you have? Do you have federal loans or private loans? What state are you planning to reside in? What's your filing status? Are you married? Are you going to file jointly or file separately with regards to your student loans? Because it matters. What are your short-term and intermediate-term goals? Does it, make more sense to go down the path of forgiveness or to refinance and pay down your loans quickly? It really just depends on who you are. And then whatever you choose to do. So after you've created your plan, follow through and do the things that need to be done to execute on that plan. If you're in an income-driven repayment plan, every year you need to recertify for your income. You need to recertify your public service through your employer. If you're I'm down the wrong way. Okay. And if you're going to refinance, think about a refinance letter. That's something you can Google, or you can reach out to us. We can talk about it. Lastly, stay informed. Up here on the screen, just to give you a big picture example of what the way we see it. There are consultants out there. There are professionals in this space. We've listed 2 here on the screen that we respect. You can certainly talk to us if you're ready to work with Private Vista in a financial planning capacity, and I'm happy to. That's how I serve our clients. But if you just want a student loan plan and you just want to look at that part of financial planning, these are 2 great places to go to. StudentLoanPlanner.com. Professionally, I respect Travis over there and Rob and the other consultants. They're going to charge you $400 to $600 for a 1-hour consult with 6 months of feedback and support. GradFin, you can get through us. They're going to give you a 15-minute free consultation, analysis of your loans, and a general recommendation on whether you should go for public service loan forgiveness and loan forgiveness in general, or a public service loan forgiveness program. I think they have a program that's $200 for the year where they will handhold you through the process. That's up to you. Both of them are great resources. In the center, federal student aid, that's studentaid.ed.gov. That's a great place, just big Wikipedia resource. Not exactly as user-friendly, but they revamped their website in the last month, and it's a lot better than it used to be. I like to use Student Loan Hero for calculators. Calculators only as good as the user, so just be careful that you don't misinform yourself. Make sure that you are going about it in the way that makes sense for your situation. And the best way to do that is hire a student loan consultant. And lastly, the loan servicers. It's not an exhaustive list. These are just the most common loan servicers. Every school has a different loan servicer they typically partner with. I will say that Fed Loan Servicing is the only servicing company that's allowed to process public service loan forgiveness applications. So if you're going for that, then your loans are eventually going to head to that servicing company. The other thing I'll say about loan servicers are the people on the line there. They're not equipped to help you, to give you advice. They're equipped to help process, get you from A to B, move you from plan to plan. Their job is to get you off the phone as quickly as possible and get the paperwork through. So I wouldn't go to them for advice. Okay.
Thanks, Dan.
That's the end. Yep. Go ahead, Mike.
No, that's right. So thanks, Dan. That was that was really informative, and I bet eye-opening for a lot of people. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and let me see if I can get us on the right slide. So let's recap everything briefly. I just got to scroll here. This is technical challenges for apologize here. We're going to get here. Okay. So I bet that was eye-opening for a lot of people and hopefully informative. So let's recap everything briefly. So this is Mike and Dan's top 7, so M and D. So remember, number 1, the 5 wealth building habits. Spend less than you earn, pay yourself first, 20% is the goal, avoid bad debt, set long-term goals and give generously. Also, make wise housing decisions. 3rd, make good student loan repayment choices. 4, periodically review your financial goals and then track your progress. And then a couple of other bonus suggestions we'll throw in here is every time you get a pay increase in the future, a bonus or something of that sort, put away a good chunk of it, up to half of it towards additional savings or paying off your loan. And then lastly, another thing that we found very helpful is using some sort of personal financial management software to aggregate accounts to track your finances. There's lots of apps out there, there's lots of programs, something so you get an idea on how much you're spending and where you're spending it. Those would all be helpful things to do. So next steps would be, if you're ready to talk financial planning with us at all, Dan and I, each of us, our advisors, are capable and competent, and you can reach out to me, Mike Wang, to start with. And if you feel that you're a little bit out of depth with your loan situation or need some directional advice, you can schedule a 10-minute call with Dan Rooker. Our emails are here on the screen. Feel free to reach out to us. There's no initial cost for talking to us, and if there's something that looks like it may need to do, we can explore that further. And with that, we're going to hand off the mic to Matt Courier, our host, to go over a few questions or any questions that you may have. So again, remember, if you have any questions, you want to submit them, there should be a questions tab on the side where you can do that. And we'll turn it over to Dan. And thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
Great. Thank you to both of you. That was excellent and very informative. We've reached the question and answer portion of our presentation here. We have a few questions that have already rolled into the queue, but if you want to go ahead and put in those your last minute questions, we'll read them off as they come in. But got a couple here regarding student loans for you, Dan. The first one being, does the new CARES Act affect me and my loans as a soon-to-be graduate?
Okay. Yeah, what I'd say to that is, if you are soon to be graduating, right now your loans are in what's called in-school deferment. They're not on a repayment plan. Like I said before, if you don't do anything, you let your loans happen to you, they're heading the direction of the 10-year standard repayment plan. The interest rates as of March 13th, were reduced to 0. So, you don't have to do anything. Your interest rates on your loans are going to be 0. And then it will revert to, if things don't change, the end of September, the interest will be turned back on your loans. Now, if you want to, get credit towards loan forgiveness, whether that's 20 years, 25 years, or public service loan forgiveness, 10 years, if you let your loans happen to you and you go through the grace period, you don't get any credit towards forgiveness. So what you would want to do, and this isn't advice, this is just how you do it, is you graduate, you get notification, you sign into where your loans are, and you consolidate all of your loans. You waive the grace period. So the way that you waive the grace period is by consolidating. They go hand in hand. And when you consolidate, you choose an income-driven repayment plan, one of the forgiveness plans that fits your situation. And every month that you make a payment on that plan, whether it's a $0 payment, which it is that's how the CARES Act is going. There's $0 payments and 0% interest from March 13th to the end of September. Every payment, $0 payment this summer would count towards loan forgiveness. If you let your loans happen to you, you do nothing, you focus on other things, you don't get credit towards forgiveness, but you do benefit from the CARES Act in that your payments are 0 and the interest is 0. Hope that helps.
Great. Dan, another one for you. Is the PSLF amount of years prorated at all, or must you work a minimum of 10 years to qualify?
So is the amount of, is it prorated at all? So
the amount of years.
The amount of years. So it's 120
Dan,
monthly.
Maybe the question is, do they have to be consecutive payments, or what if you work for two different jobs? And thinking.
Sure. So yeah, so say like Jeremy in our example worked for the state for 5 years, went into private practice, or took off a year for, let's say he had a really generous paternity leave, and then he decided he really liked being at home, and he just stayed at home for another 6 months. And then anyways, let's say that you do that. You don't have to make 120 qualifying payments consecutively. You can take time off. You can come back. As long as you make 120 payments in total, then you can apply for while working for a qualified employer, then you can apply for public service loan forgiveness.
Great. Dan, another one for you here. With the job market being so uncertain, could you discuss loan forbearance and deferments?
Sure. So deferment is something that you have right now. If you're a current borrower and a soon-to-be graduate, you're in what's called in-school deferment. And what that means, how that works is, let's say that you had, I'm going to pick an easy round number. So let's say you have $200,000 loan balance, and you're going from year 2 to year 3 of law school. And that $200,000 is at a 6% interest rate. So the interest on that balance would be $12,000 over the course of 1 year. The way student loans work is simple interest. So your balance at the beginning of year 2 is $200,000, and at the end of year 2, it's $212,000. And let's just say, for simplicity's sake, you don't take out any more loans after that. At the end of year 3, it's $224,000. It's not compound interest; it's interest based on the original balance. So you have, when you're in school deferment, that's how it works. Forbearance is a little bit different. What forbearance means is you're out of school, you can't make your payments because the job situation is it's difficult, and you request forbearance. What happens with forbearance is, instead of it being simple interest, the interest gets charged on the higher balance now. So instead of 200 to 212, that's the same. But from year 2 to year 3, it's 6% on 212,000. And that's how forbearance works on a monthly basis. It's not, if you can't, I guess what I'd say is you have 6 months. So this is where the grace period can be a gift. You have 6 months, and think about, you could, if you were not claimed by your parents, so if you claimed your taxes yourself for 2019, which I would suggest that if you can file your tax return for 2019 based on last year's income, you can use that to get yourself into an income-driven repayment plan, either at the end of this 6-month repayment grace period or sometime this summer. And based on last year's income of zero, or zero plus summer internship money, you would probably have a near $0 payment per month, and it would still count. So you could buy yourself not just 6 months of a grace period, but up to an additional 12 months of $0 payments that count towards forgiveness on an income-driven repayment plan. So I think 18 months hopefully is enough time to find gainful employment, and hope that helps.
Great. Next question for you, Dan. Short one here. Does loan forgiveness apply to private loans?
Loan forgiveness does not apply to private loans, unfortunately. So that's another thing to note. If you have federal loans, and most of us do or did, once you refinance, you can't go back. You can't change your mind 3 months later. Loan forgiveness is not part of the private loan space. If there is a company that forgives loans privately, a for-profit company, which I doubt it, that would be news to me.
Great. Next question. Is there any benefit to saving less and putting more towards your student loan payments?
Absolutely, if your plan is to pay your loan payments down. So the way I'd approach this as a borrower thinking about this going into graduation is, I need to figure this out. And if I want to save the most money for myself on my side of the balance sheet, then I'm either going to go for loan forgiveness and do whatever I need to do to make that loan payment as low as possible. It doesn't benefit me to make extra payments. So there's the path of loan forgiveness. Or my plan is to pay this down as quickly as possible and as soon as I'm able to. So that could be when you do make that switch to a higher income. I'd say, if you go down that path, then yeah, it benefits you to pay it down more quickly, as long as your plan is to pay it down to zero. It doesn't benefit you to do something in between. That just wastes your own money.
Dan, I'm going to jump in here and just say too, it's always a balance. I think that's the difficulty when it comes to sort of financial planning and looking at the big picture. So it's really individual situation. I do think it's a good idea to save and towards that emergency cash reserve, for example. So in some instances, I could see where it would be maybe for a time period, just putting all that additional savings towards developing that emergency cash reserve, so that if a true emergency comes up, you don't have to borrow at a high interest rate to pay that off. Or you could maybe split it up a little bit and say, all right, well, out of my savings, I'm going to allocate half of it towards emergency savings and half of it towards student pay down. So it's, it's not always a cut and dry answer, but it's competing priorities to balance.
Right. I agree with you, Mike. I think that's take my comments as these are the more textbook answers. These are the how you save money on paper the most, but usually, like my example, it just doesn't work out that way. And people will, lose a few months here and there towards the path. Just as long as you figured out the direction that you want to go, figure it out as soon as you can and head down that path.
Great. There are a couple other follow-up specific questions here that we may follow up with you all and individually offline. But one last question for you, Dan, here for the group is, are your undergraduate and law school loans consolidated, or do you need separate plans for them?
Yeah, so let me just take a step back. And so undergrad and graduate school, depends on when you borrowed. I'd consider a newer borrower post 2014. So if you have loans from before that, or you have loans prior to 2007, we can talk about that offline. But the way loans work in general is I'll use law school as an example. You can borrow up to $40,500 per year of direct unsubsidized loans. Anything above that you need to borrow come in the form of what's called direct plus loans. So by default, every year you're going to have at least 2 different loans for law school. And usually those loans are dispersed once a semester. I think the requirement is twice a year. So you're going to have at least 6 loans from law school dispersed twice a year. Undergrad works very similarly, just lower loan limits. So it's likely that if you have undergrad loans and grad school loans, you have probably, at least 10 loans. And I've already forgotten the question, Matt, so maybe you can repeat it, but you can consolidate those loans into one. And I would only do that if it makes sense. If you decide to go for forgiveness and you decided to waive your grace period, you have a job, everything's lining up perfectly. But if not, then you may want to wait to consolidate for a little bit. So when you do have a plan, consolidation doesn't hurt you early on in the first 6 months. It just makes things more simple. One plan, one payment that gets counted towards loan forgiveness. If you refinance, you can refinance any one of the 10. You can refinance all 10 into one loan. And that's also, when you refinance, the thing you're changing is the interest rate. The balance stays the same. When you consolidate on the federal loan side, you're not changing the interest rate. What you're doing is you're taking an average of the interest rate. And there is some optimization on that side of things, but you're basically taking the average interest rate and you're combining all the loans into one. Did I answer the question, Matt?
I think it did in the way it was posed. And again, I would encourage you all to you have Dan and Mike's email to take them up on their offer for kind of a quick consultation if you'd like to get more into the specifics of your situation.
All right. With that, thank you so much, everyone, for participating on today's webinar. We really appreciate your time. Hopefully this is helpful, and we wish the best to you as you get started on your careers and graduation. Thanks again, everyone.